Hello, everyone. It's fantastic to be here. I've not been to Windsor before, and you have a beautiful city. I'm here to discuss and hopefully advance the discussion on leadership positions for the disability community in Ontario. And in order for communities to expand and flourish, there must be a mandate of including the community on provincial boards, agencies, and commissions. As a woman living with disabilities, I am often challenged by gaps in policies and programs and glaring absences in services and aspects of community involvement that I'm engaged in. For example, there is often a lack of consultation with disability communities, even when the policies and programs being discussed impact us the most. This has been the case with implementing health equity programs, such as breast cancer screening for women with disabilities. Currently, no formalized accommodations exist in breast screening programs. When it comes to the implementation of accessible transit routes and wayfinding, disability communities are often asked for their input in the middle of the process or after the process is completed, and this must change. The Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act is slowly coming into force, finding its legislative role and navigating its ins and outs of what hopefully will lead to better legislative enforcement of the inclusion of disabled bodies and minds in the province. Disabled people face a significant barrier in participating in governance and attaining positions of decision-making power because we have historically been excluded from social, political, and economic life. One policy change that would address this would be mandating the presence of persons with disabilities on provincial boards, agencies, and commissions. When speaking about disability, I'm referring to it as a self-defining category. As Tanya Tichkowski and Rod McKelko put it, disability is to disability studies a fluid and shifting set of meanings involved in the greater question of what it means to be a human. Thus, we understand disability as connected to, as well as reflective of the social scenes in which it always is a part. Not long ago, there were community meetings related to accessible and affordable housing in Toronto where the venue was inaccessible. When a new date for these meetings occurred with an apparently new and accessible location, although the entrance was accessible, the washrooms at the new location were not. This is the social scene, if you will, of the exclusion of disability, where disabled bodies are deemed rare and different. This needs to change, and the requirement of disabled people on agencies, boards, and commissions would change the fabric of our culture to view disability as an asset. Disabled bodies and minds are rarely seen in Canadian governments and positions of power. Although the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act will be in full force in 2025, many organizations, including government bodies, are struggling to implement these changes effectively and on time. Women with disabilities in particular have less representation on agencies, boards, and commissions than men, despite the fact that there is a higher prevalence in all age groups for girls and women living with disabilities in Canada. Disabled women also report lower rates of employment than disabled men in Canada. Additionally, in June of 2016, the Ontario government announced gender-based targets for provincial boards, citing the need to promote female leadership when it comes to board governance. Since I'm a fierce feminist, I have embraced this change wholeheartedly with the belief that people with disabilities, and women in particular, are less visible and active on agencies, boards, and commissions because of barriers in the system. Applying an accessibility lens to this new governance framework is crucial to making Ontario accessible. When more people with disabilities are seen and acknowledged in leadership roles, policies and programs will be more responsive to disabled people, allowing for the full potential, talents, and abilities of people with disabilities to be shared and affect the communities in which we live. Some of the barriers to being more politically involved have been identified by disability communities, include a lack of access to public spaces in the recruitment process for agencies and boards and commissions, and inaccessible recruitment postings, a lack of remuneration for important work being done in the community, and the impacts of token representation. These have far-reaching implications. People with disabilities are routinely confronted with inaccessibility in Ontario. Inaccessible doctor's offices and inaccessible transit routes, a business that lacks an accessible format or website, leading to longer wait times for processing of ODSP applications as one example. Many of these barriers still exist because people with disabilities are significantly underrepresented on provincial boards, agencies, and commissions. The underemployment rate of persons with disabilities in the province of Ontario is also well known, and should this centralizing of leadership idea take hold, I believe that it will have an impact on improving the socioeconomic status of people with disabilities in the community. Improving access to employment through policy change would have a significant effect on social inclusion. As of 2011, the employment rate of people with disabilities in Ontario was 49% compared to 79% for people without disabilities. What's more, 12% of people with disabilities reported being refused a job because of the presence of disability. Earlier this year, on June 5th of 2017, the Government of Ontario unveiled an employment strategy called Access Talent, Ontario's Employment Strategy for People with Disabilities. Among other things, it called for employers with 20 employees to have at least one employee that had a self-identifying disability. At the time the government launched this strategy, the Ontario Public Service indicated that only 12% of its workforce self-identified as having a disability. I wonder how many employees in the Ontario Public Service identify as being in leadership roles or in roles of progressive advancement. Recent data shows that about 14% of Canadians are currently living with a disability. As such, there should be a minimum of one person per agency, board, and commission who self-identifies this way. This policy proposes that all meetings for provincial boards, agencies, and commissions take place in accessible locations, regardless of the abilities of its current or former membership. The phase-in target for this project can be achieved by all provincial boards, agencies, and commissions within 5 to 8 years. The interview process for each board include a minimum of 2 candidates who self-identify as living with a disability, and leadership on boards, agencies, and commissions utilize an accessibility lens that is also gender inclusive to the fullest extent possible when looking at spaces, programs, and policies that are within the charge of the relevant organization. That honoraria be offered for these appointments, if not pay, to boards, agencies, and commissions. Increased representation of disabled people in leadership will help to advance the disability communities in ways that are currently not supported by provincial policies and legislation. I believe that having people with disabilities themselves apply an accessibility lens to provincial boards, agencies, and commissions would be a crucial step to achieving a more accessible Ontario. Thank you very much.